Ice Age. Live Action Series, 25 to 2026 Chapter 1. Awakening the past. The winds howled through the jagged cliffs, carrying whispers of a time long forgotten. In the frozen north, beneath layers of ice and snow, a secret was about to be unearthed. It had been 25 years since the Ice Age came to a close, and the world had slowly but surely adjusted to the warmer climates. But somewhere in the Arctic wilderness, the past was stirring. Dr. Emma Rivera, a renowned paleontologist, stood before an ancient glacier. Her breath formed clouds of vapor in the cold air, but she paid little attention to it. Her eyes were locked on the massive crack in the glacier head, which had opened up after a particularly brutal winter storm. The crack revealed a hidden world, the remnants of a time when woolly mammoths roamed the earth, giant sloths hung from the trees, and saber-toothed tigers stalked the land. "I can't believe it," Emma whispered to herself, kneeling beside a partially exposed mammoth tusk. "This could rewrite everything we know about prehistory." The crack was just the beginning. In the following days, Emma and her team would uncover a time capsule of sorts, perfectly preserved in the frozen depths. Fossils, ancient cave paintings, and even evidence of early human civilization, it all pointed to a singular truth: the Ice Age had left behind far more than just bones. There were untold stories buried under the ice, waiting to be told. Chapter 2. The Lost Tribe. While Emma and her team made their discoveries, strange things were happening elsewhere. Deep in the icy forests, a group of researchers working for a private corporation had been sent to investigate unusual seismic activity. At first, they thought it was a simple case of tectonic shifts, but as the tremors continued, they began to dig deeper. They uncovered a massive underground cavern, a place where time itself seemed to have stood still. The cavern was far larger than anything they could have imagined. Inside, the remnants of a lost tribe emerged, untouched by modern history. Their preserved tools, clothing, and even remnants of their shelters gave insight into a civilization that had survived long after the Ice Age should have been over. The tribe, known as the Northerners, had thrived in a hidden pocket of the world, their survival thanks to an unknown natural resource that had kept them alive through centuries of extreme cold. But as they ventured further into the cavern, something else became apparent. The Northerners were not alone. Chapter 3. The creatures beneath. Unknown to the modern world, the subterranean caverns housed not just human artifacts, but also remnants of prehistoric creatures, some of which had evolved in isolation from the rest of the world. The paleontologists discovered enormous eggs, the size of boulders, deep within the caves. And then, without warning, they began to hatch. Massive, clawed creatures emerged, creatures that should have gone extinct long ago. They were not the mammoths and sabers that Emma had studied. They were much more dangerous, hybrids of ancient beasts, products of evolution in isolation. The caverns held not only remnants of the Ice Age, but proof that the prehistoric world hadn't disappeared entirely. The company that had funded the research, now seeing an opportunity to exploit these discoveries, moved quickly to secure the creatures, leading to a race between the team of paleontologists and the corporation's hired mercenaries. Chapter 4. Rise of the mammoths. Back in the Arctic, Emma began to piece together the story behind the findings. The Northerners had been part of an advanced civilization, one that had used the resources of the land to breed and domesticate the creatures of the Ice Age. Mammoths had not only been used as beasts of burden, but had been raised alongside humans. The Northerners had created a symbiotic relationship with the animals, ensuring their survival even as the planet's climate shifted. The more Emma dug, the more she realized that the creatures in the caves were not random survivors. They were part of a deliberate effort to preserve the ancient world. The experiments of the Northerners had been designed to ensure that the world of the Ice Age would not be forgotten, but with the corporation closing in on the secret, Emma faced a difficult decision. Would she continue her research and risk the lives of everyone involved? Or would she try to stop the exploitation of these ancient creatures before they were destroyed or sold to the highest bidder? Chapter 5. The battle for the future. As tensions escalated, a massive snowstorm hit the region, cutting off access to the rest of the world. The corporation's mercenaries, eager to capture the creatures and sell them on the black market, found themselves at odds with Emma and her team. The paleontologists, now deeply connected to the history they had uncovered, understood the importance of protecting these prehistoric animals and the culture that had nurtured them. In a dramatic confrontation beneath the ice, Emma's team faced off against the mercenaries. As the fight raged on, the creatures that had been awakened by the seismic activity began to emerge from their underground lairs, drawn to the noise and chaos. The once docile mammoths, sloths, and saber-tooths turned the tide of battle, fighting to protect their territory. The storm outside raged as Emma, determined to protect the legacy of the Ice Age, made a final push to get the creatures back to safety, not just for scientific study, but for preservation. In the end, she succeeded, but at a great cost. Epilogue. The New Age. By the time the storm cleared, the corporation had been forced to retreat. The creatures had been returned to their natural environment, and the remnants of the lost civilization were preserved, free from exploitation. Emma's discoveries would become the foundation of a new understanding of Earth's ancient history. The Ice Age was not a period that had simply ended. It was a chapter in an ongoing story, one where the creatures of the past still had a place in the future. As Emma stood on the edge of the icy tundra, looking out over the frozen world, she knew that the next chapter was just beginning. The creatures of the Ice Age had survived for centuries. Now, humanity would have to figure out how to coexist with them, and how to protect the fragile balance between ancient and modern worlds. But one thing was certain: the Ice Age was far from over. The Reawakening, 2026, Chapter 1. The ice holds secrets. 6 months had passed since the chaotic battle in the Arctic, where ancient creatures once thought extinct had been reintroduced to the world. Dr. Emma Rivera's life had been turned upside down. She had become a global figure, lauded as a hero in the scientific community, but at great personal cost. The corporation that had sought to exploit the creatures was in ruins, but the world was still grappling with the implications of what they had uncovered beneath the ice. Emma now lived in a remote research facility near the Arctic Circle, overseeing the conservation of the surviving Ice Age species. The mammoths, saber-tooths, and giant sloths were thriving in a controlled environment, but Emma's mind was never at rest. There were still questions unanswered, and an unsettling sense of urgency had begun to creep into her thoughts. The winter was harsh. A new storm system had settled over the region, more intense than anything Emma had witnessed before. As the days shortened and the temperatures plummeted, she began to hear rumors of strange phenomena spreading beyond the ice. Local inhabitants reported sightings of massive creatures in the mountains, creatures that should not exist. Something was changing in the frozen world. Chapter 2. The echoes of ice. The storm had not let up for days when Emma received an unexpected message. It was from Dr. Alan Jorgensen, an old colleague who had worked on the initial excavation team. He was in the far reaches of Siberia, near a place called the Cleft, a remote valley surrounded by towering glacier. According to his message, he had uncovered evidence of something far older than the lost tribe of the Northerners, something that could change everything they knew about Ice Age civilization. "I need your help," Alan's voice crackled through the radio. "It's not just the creatures. There's something more here, something ancient, something alive." Emma's heart raced as she grabbed her gear. She had no choice but to investigate. With her team already stretched thin and tensions rising, she knew this would not be a simple expedition. But the mystery was too large to ignore. Something was out there, hidden beneath the snow, waiting to be found. Chapter 3. The Ice Rift. Emma's journey to Siberia took her through the remnants of the frozen wilderness, now starting to thaw at the edges. The Ice Age was no longer confined to the past. It was blending with the present. As she approached the cleft, Alan's team greeted her with urgency. "We don't know what we're dealing with," Alan admitted, his face grim. "What we found isn't just old, it's connected. The creatures, the ancient tribes, it's all part of something much bigger." The cleft was a massive rift in the earth, stretching hundreds of miles and descending deep into the planet. The walls of the rift were lined with fossils, but these fossils were unlike anything Emma had seen before. Some appeared to be completely different species, while others seemed to be hybrids. They were experimenting, Emma murmured, her mind racing. The Northerners, they didn't just coexist with the Ice Age creatures. They modified them. They were trying to control the evolution of these creatures, to create something beyond what nature intended. As they explored deeper into the rift, Emma's team uncovered strange symbols carved into the walls, markings that suggested the existence of an ancient civilization far more advanced than the one that had survived the Ice Age. These markings seemed to indicate a connection between the surviving creatures and an unknown, hidden power, a force buried beneath the ice for millennia. Chapter 4. The Sleeper. As they dug further, Emma and Alan made a chilling discovery. A large chamber buried deep beneath the ice, its walls covered in intricate murals and carvings. But the most terrifying part was what lay at the center of the chamber, an enormous, suspended creature, preserved in ice. It was not a mammoth, or a saber-tooth. It was something else entirely, something alien in appearance. The creature was unlike anything Emma had ever studied. It was a hybrid, yes, but not of any known species. It had 6 limbs, elongated features, and a set of eyes that seemed to watch them, even in its frozen state. It was almost as if it was waiting to wake up. The Sleeper, Alan whispered, his voice tinged with awe and fear. It's the key to everything. The Northerners, they believed this creature was the protector of their world, their connection to the ice itself. It's not just a biological entity, it's something more. Emma's thoughts raced. This creature, this Sleeper, had been preserved for a reason. It was linked to the ancient power that had allowed the Ice Age to survive in isolated pockets. But what would happen if it woke? Chapter 5. The Awakening. That night, a violent tremor shook the ground. The air grew colder, the winds faster, as if the earth itself was reacting to the disturbance. The ancient rift was beginning to shift, its massive walls cracking under pressure. Emma and Alan were caught in a race against time as they tried to study the creature further, knowing the rift was destabilizing. Suddenly, the Sleeper's eyes opened. Not in the way of a living creature, but in a pulse, a wave of energy that seemed to flow outward. The ice around them began to crack, and the creatures of the ancient world, the mammoths and saber-tooths, responded in kind. They were drawn toward the rift, as if the Sleeper's awakening had triggered something inside them. The power, Emma gasped, it's waking them up, all of them. As the Sleeper's power surged, the ground began to rumble violently. The ancient hybrids from the rift, creatures once thought extinct or mythical, began to emerge from the ice, their forms twisting and shifting with an unnatural energy. The line between the prehistoric world and the present day began to blur. With time running out and the rift threatening to collapse, Emma had to make a critical decision. The Sleeper was powerful, but it was also unstable. If the creatures were allowed to roam freely, they could trigger an ecological disaster. But if they sealed the rift, they could be locking away the key to understanding the ancient forces that had shaped the planet. Chapter 6. Into the storm. Emma's team worked feverishly, trying to contain the energy leaking from the rift. As the creatures gathered outside the chamber, Emma realized there was only one way to stop them. She would have to activate the ancient technology the Northerners had used to control the evolution of these beasts. It was their last hope of preventing catastrophe. As the storm intensified outside, the creatures began to break through the barriers, but Emma managed to activate the control mechanism. The surge of energy reverberated through the ice, freezing the creatures in place, just long enough for Emma and her team to escape. The rift began to close, but not before the last remnants of the creature's power flowed into the world. The storm intensified, a final warning of what was to come. Emma understood now, the Ice Age wasn't truly over. It had merely been waiting for the right moment to return. Months had passed since the fateful events in Siberia. The rift had been sealed, and the ancient creature known as the Sleeper was locked away once more beneath the ice. But the world had changed. The creatures of the Ice Age, the mammoths, saber-tooths, and giant sloths, no longer belonged to the past. They were not just relics. They were part of the present, and they were awakening in more ways than one. Dr. Emma Rivera, once a leading figure in the scientific community, now found herself on the front lines of a global crisis. Governments and corporations around the world scrambled to understand what had been unleashed. The ice, it seemed, was melting faster than ever, and with it came the re-emergence of ancient species that had long been thought extinct. But these creatures were not docile, nor were they easy to control. They were wild, unpredictable, and perhaps far more intelligent than anyone had anticipated. The Earth itself was reacting to the disturbance. Superstorms, tremors, and mysterious energy surges were reported in multiple regions, all leading to one frightening conclusion: the awakening of the Ice Age was only the beginning. Chapter 2. The last sanctuary. Emma had retreated to a secretive outpost, a high-tech facility located near the frozen remnants of the cleft. Alan Jorgensen, still reeling from their discoveries, was by her side, but they both knew their work had only scratched the surface. The Sleeper might have been sealed away, but it was not the only force at play. "We've underestimated what we unleashed," Alan said, his voice heavy with regret as they examined new satellite data. The energy signatures from the rift had not disappeared. The Sleeper may have been the catalyst, but something is spreading. "Look at this." He pointed to a map of the world, showing a strange pattern of rising temperatures, seismic disturbances, and unusual animal migrations. The animals are responding to the energy from the rift. Some are migrating south, others are acting erratically. Emma studied the data, her brow furrowed. "But we thought the creatures were tied to the Sleeper, not to the energy itself." "That's what we don't understand," Alan replied. "What if the energy isn't just about the creatures? What if it's about the planet? What if it's waking something deeper, something buried under the ice for millennia?" Emma's mind raced. The Sleeper might have been the key to the rift, but there were far greater forces at play. Forces that, if left unchecked, could bring about a new age, an age where the Ice Age ruled once more. Chapter 3. The Beast Within. Back in the thawing world, the creatures were not the only things transforming. The presence of Ice Age animals had begun to disrupt local ecosystems. The sheer scale of the mammoths and the aggressive nature of the saber-tooths had thrown the natural balance into disarray. Yet, it was not just the animals that had evolved. People had begun to change, too. The world's growing fascination with the creatures had led to a new form of connection between humanity and the ancient beasts. Some believed that by studying the creatures, they could unlock secrets of the human genome. Others, more daring, had begun genetic experiments, attempting to merge human DNA with the ancient species, in a bid to survive the new world emerging from beneath the ice. In one of the most remote locations in the Arctic, a bioengineering corporation known as Arctis Gentech had launched a controversial project: the creation of Ice Age hybrids. These genetically altered humans, designed to survive in the harsh conditions of the New World, were being raised to be a new kind of soldier, part human, part creature. The first success, known as Project Frost, had already been tested. They were stronger, faster, and more resilient than ordinary humans, but the side effects were disturbing. The hybrid soldiers, while highly effective, began to exhibit the primal instincts of the Ice Age animals they were based on. The more they interacted with the creatures, the more their behavior grew unpredictable. Dr. Kira Voss, the lead geneticist behind Arctis Gentech, was determined to push the boundaries of what these hybrids could become. "They're not just survivors," she said, as she watched one of the hybrids, a young woman named Lyra, interact with a group of saber-toothed tigers in the lab. "They are the future of humanity." But Emma knew that the line between survival and madness was thin. The hybrids weren't just evolving, they were beginning to awaken memories of the past, memories of a time when humans and animals had shared a different kind of bond. And in their awakening, they might bring about the downfall of the world that had emerged from the thaw. Chapter 4. The Call of the Wild. Meanwhile, in the remote corners of the world, isolated tribes and communities, who had lived in the shadows of the Ice Age creatures, were beginning to stir. Some had always known that the creatures would one day return, as part of an ancient prophecy passed down through generations. These tribes, descendants of the Northerners, were scattered across the globe, in the far reaches of South America, the frozen tundra of Siberia, and even in the deep recesses of the African savanna. In the heart of South America, a group of survivors, led by a fierce and enigmatic woman named Taya, had found their own way to coexist with the creatures of the Ice Age. They had not only learned to live with the beasts, but to communicate with them. Through ancient rituals, they had forged a bond that allowed them to harness the creatures' instincts and abilities. But Taya had seen the signs. The balance was shifting. "The world is changing," Taya said to her tribe, her voice filled with urgency. "The ice is melting, and the creatures are waking up. But there are forces at work that would use them for their own gain. We must prepare. We must remind the world that the Ice Age was not just a time of cold, it was a time of power." Taya's tribe was determined to protect the balance, not just for their survival, but for the future of the world. They knew the Ice Age had never truly ended, it had simply waited for the right moment to return. Chapter 5. The Tipping Point. As the world teetered on the brink of chaos, Emma and Alan received a warning from a source they had never expected. Lyra, the first successful hybrid soldier, had escaped Arctes Gentek's control. She had learned the truth about her origins, and the more she came to understand her connection to the Ice Age creatures, the more unstable she became. "I can feel them," Lyra's voice echoed through a private transmission. "The creatures are not just animals. They are part of something much bigger. Something that has been waiting for millennia." Emma understood. Lyra was no longer just a human, she was a bridge to the ancient world, a conduit for the Ice Age's power. And if Lyra's connection to the creatures grew too strong, she could bring about the very collapse of the new world. The race was on. Emma had to find Lyra before it was too late, before the hybrid's power spread beyond control, and the Ice Age's wild forces overtook the Earth. But the truth was even more terrifying than Emma had feared. There was no way to stop the creatures. The Ice Age had already begun its return. Chapter 6. The Ice Phoenix. As Emma and Alan embarked on their final mission to find Lyra, they faced a shocking discovery. The planet itself was not just warming, it was being remade. The energy from the rift had begun to change the fundamental nature of Earth's climate. A new Ice Age was not simply a return to the past. It was a rebirth, a transformation of the planet, where ancient forces would clash with modern civilization, but the Ice Age would not bring only death. It would bring renewal. And in the center of it all stood Lyra, the living embodiment of a world that had died and was now being born again. As Emma looked out over the snow-covered landscape, she realized the world had entered a new era. The creatures, the hybrids, and the ancient forces beneath the ice would shape the future. The Ice Age was back, but this time, it was no longer just a season. It was a new dawn. The heart of the storm, the world had entered a new era, one shaped by the forces of the Ice Age, reawakened and thriving like an ancient, unstoppable force. The energy from the rift, once a mysterious anomaly, had spread far beyond the Arctic Circle, touching every corner of the globe. The temperature fluctuations were only a symptom. The true transformation was in the air itself, in the changing patterns of the land, and in the creatures that now shared the planet with humanity. Dr. Emma Rivera stood at the edge of what had once been a bustling city center in Europe, now a frozen wasteland. The ice had claimed everything, buildings, roads, entire neighborhoods, and yet, beneath it all, a new life was emerging. Mammoths and other ancient beasts had begun migrating south, drawn to the massive storms that swept across the planet, fueled by the rift's residual energy. In a command center set up far from the devastation, Emma, along with her trusted team, monitored the ongoing changes. Alan Jorgensen, ever the skeptic, was increasingly convinced that the rift was only one part of a much larger phenomenon. As the storms grew more violent and the Earth's poles shifted, humanity's greatest fear was taking shape. The return of the Ice Age was no longer a natural event. It was an evolutionary push, one that forced life to adapt or perish. What do we do now? Alan asked, his voice grim, as he watched a satellite feed showing the massive shifts in the global climate. We wait, Emma said, staring out over the horizon where the ice encroached on the once thriving cities. We don't have a choice. The world is rewriting itself, and we have to understand why. We've already seen the hybrid soldiers, but they are just a reflection of something deeper. The Ice Age didn't just come back, it's adapting, evolving. What if it's not just the world adapting? Alan asked, turning toward her. What if humanity itself is being reshaped by this? Emma didn't answer immediately. She had a growing sense that the creatures, the hybrids, and even the storms were all connected to one thing, the sleeper. It had never been just a biological creature. It was the center of a living, breathing system, a system that could control and manipulate the planet's cycles. If the sleeper woke fully, it could signal the complete domination of the Ice Age over the Earth. Chapter 2, The Awakening of Lyra. Lyra, the hybrid soldier, was still at large. After escaping from Arctis Gentech, she had become something more than human. Her connection to the Ice Age creatures had grown exponentially. The hybrids, initially created as weapons, had begun to exhibit not only enhanced strength and intelligence, but also an instinctual ability to communicate with the ancient beasts. It was as if they could feel the pulse of the planet itself. Emma's research had led her to one terrifying conclusion: Lyra was no longer just a product of science. She was a bridge to something far older, a direct link between humanity and the forces of the Ice Age. The more Lyra interacted with the creatures, the more she tapped into the energy of the rift. The world around her was changing, bending to her will. In a hidden facility beneath the ice, Lyra stood before a massive projection of the sleeper. Its eyes, glowing a faint blue, pulsed with energy. It was alive, and it was speaking to her. The world is incomplete, the voice whispered in her mind, ancient and powerful. You are the key to restoring it. You are the bridge between life and death, between the past and the future. Lyra's fingers twitched as she reached out to touch the image of the sleeper. She could feel the power coursing through her, and for the first time, she understood what she had become. The transformation was not just physical, it was spiritual. The rift had awakened something inside her, something primal, ancient, and unstoppable. Chapter 3, The War for Earth. As Lyra's connection to the rift deepened, the balance of power in the world began to shift. The ancient creatures, no longer merely beasts of the past, began to move in unison. Massive herds of mammoths crossed the ice sheets, while packs of saber-tooths hunted in coordinated attacks. The hybrids, emboldened by their powers, became a force of their own. No longer weapons, they had become the harbingers of a new world, one where humanity's role was uncertain. The global military powers, led by the remnants of Arctis Gentech, viewed the hybrids as both a threat and a resource. They had been bred for strength and survival, but now, they were becoming more than tools. They were an army, a living, evolving army. Nations raced to harness this power, but some feared the consequences of unleashing creatures and people who were no longer bound by human constraints. Emma, torn between her allegiance to humanity and the growing realization of what had to be done, knew she had to find Lyra. The hybrid's awakening signaled the beginning of something that could not be reversed. If Lyra succeeded in fully merging with the rift's energy, the Ice Age would not just return, it would dominate the planet. She assembled a small team, including Alan, to track down Lyra and stop her before the hybrid's powers grew too great. But the world was not what it used to be. The storms had worsened, and the massive creatures now controlled the land. The team would have to navigate through the frozen wilderness, where even the weather itself had become an enemy. "We're running out of time," Alan said as they prepared for the mission. "If Lyra is as powerful as you think, she might be the only one who can stop this, but I don't know if she'll be able to control it." "She won't stop it," Emma replied, her voice steady. "She'll finish what the sleeper started. We have to stop her before it's too late." Chapter 4. The Siege of the Sleeper. As Emma and her team neared the hidden rift facility, the world around them began to crack under the strain. Tremors shook the ground. The skies, filled with swirling clouds of ice and snow, had taken on an unnatural hue. It was as though the planet itself was preparing for something momentous. The facility stood before them, a massive, crumbling structure buried beneath layers of ice. Emma knew this was the heart of it all. If Lyra was here, the final phase of the Ice Age's return had begun. The creature at the center of the rift, the Sleeper, was waiting for the moment when Lyra would fully merge with it, and with it, the energy that could reshape the world. Inside, Lyra stood before the Sleeper, her form glowing with unnatural light. The creatures, mammoths, saber-tooths, and even the hybrids, stood around her in a circle, as if drawn to the power emanating from the hybrid soldier. Lyra closed her eyes and whispered the words that had been etched into her mind. "It is time." As the rift pulsed, the entire world seemed to shudder. The storm outside reached its peak, and the ice began to crack. Emma, Alan, and the rest of the team stormed into the facility, confronting Lyra, just as the transformation reached its apex. "Lyra!" Emma called out, her voice desperate. "You don't understand what you're doing. The Ice Age is not just coming back, it will erase everything, the world you know, the world we live in. It will be like nothing ever existed." Lyra turned to face her, her eyes glowing with the energy of the rift. "The world you know is already gone, Emma," she said softly. "It's time for the Earth to return to what it was. To its roots. To the ice. To the creatures. To us." As Emma stepped forward, she realized there was no stopping this. The rift, Lyra, the creatures, they were all part of the same force, pushing the planet toward a new era. The Ice Age was no longer a time in history. It was a living entity, an unstoppable wave. Chapter 5. The ice phoenix rises. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and the skies erupted with blizzards that could tear through steel. The transformation was complete. The Earth was shifting, evolving, and the creatures that had once dominated the planet were now its rulers once more. But there was hope. A last glimmer. As the final battle raged between Emma's team and the awakened forces, it became clear. The Ice Age was not just a return to the past. It was a new beginning. The world would change, but humanity would not be left behind. Those who survived would find a way to coexist with the creatures, with the power of the Ice Age. But there was one last choice to make, one final decision that would determine the fate of the Earth. Would humanity adapt to the new world, or would they perish beneath the ice?